A land of strange contrasts between modernity and tradition. India is also a land of stranger kings. Kings or rulers from South Asia generally need to be born in faraway lands and arrive as heroes in order to rid the populations of their misery caused by demons, epidemics, or tyrant rulers. Contemporary politics has thrown up several rulers who, given the circumstances of their ascension, emerged as unlikely power centers. Sonia Gandhi, Narendra Modi, Manmohan Singh, Yogi Adityanath, etc. are examples. But what would you say of a king that is not even human? In the West Himalayan region of India, communities are ruled by divine kings, non-human agents accepted as rulers. The divine kings are deities, constantly traveling through their realms in box-like palanquins, their processions marked with fanfare, ritual, and serious political work. The tribal region of Jaunsar Bawar and parts of the erstwhile Shimla Hill states are ruled by 4 divine kings, the Mahasus, that are considered brothers. Of the 4, while Bodha or the seated Mahasu is static, situated perpetually in the center of the realm, on the common land by the mighty river Tons. The 2 banks are ruled by Basik and Pabasik Mahasu. By far, the strongest and the youngest among the 4 siblings is Chalda, or the walking Mahasu. Ever since the divine king's arrival in the region, from the fabled lands of Kullu Kashmir, as the Mahasu drummer bards tell us, Chalda Mahasu has been touring his territory, marking boundaries and expanding the Mahasu networks of influence. Chalda Mahasu, doubtless, is a representation of a king, an idol concealed inside a silver palanquin, gilded with images of gods and goddesses, borne by upper caste bearers and protected usually by the divine king's own militia, his 12 BC Khund, or the 240 soldiers. Also accompanying the Chalda Mahasu palanquin is the Mahasu parasol, a symbol of authority and power, protected by his warriors or the Chhatrai. Chalda Mahasu has been ritually practicing the chal, or the walking, in a state and procession since times immemorial, spending 12 years on either banks of the Tons. Chalda Mahasu's travels mark a shift in the balance of power, witnessed in mass rituals of procession and possession that accompany the Devata Raja. actually are these processions? Are they mere pageants, an instrumentalization of the divine king in order to ensure hegemonic control over community? Or do they serve some larger purpose? The Mahasus, like other divine kings of the region, while in procession, are expected to bring good weather. Moving from one village to another, the kings are expected to foster unity, diagnose misfortune, exorcise evil spirits possessing subjects, healing sickness, welcome brides, bless firstborn males, settle legal disputes, pronounce punishments, and mark territorial boundaries. As shamanic performance, these processions heal. As legal performance, they bind. As political performance, they ratify. And as religious performance, they serve to sanctify. Their political significance is underscored by the significance attached to temples and processions by the divine king's subjects. The divine king's movements set processes in motion through which individuals and groups negotiate their social positions. Straddling the banks of the river, communities living in opposite banks of the Tons identify themselves as descendants of the ever-squabbling cousins from the epic Mahabharata, often engaged in reciprocal animosities. For instance, in the year 1998, while Chalda Mahasu was touring through the remote Himalayan region of Duni Bhitri on the upper banks of the Tons, Chalda Mahasu decided, the decision articulated through an oracle, to extend his stay to 3 years against the customary halt of a year at Bhitri. As the new millennium approached, his oracle announced that Mahasu would need a new palanquin. The palanquins are usually gilded pure silver, and smiths had to be invited from neighboring Kumaon to mold a vehicle befitting the divine king. Money for the several kilograms of silver metal had to be raised. Once the royal mount was ready, the deity, rather than proceeding in the destination next to the itinerary, a hamlet called Kashdhar in Himachal Pradesh, decided to travel towards Thadiyar, facing the temple at Hanol, the procession eventually arriving there in the year 2000. This was the year the state of Uttarakhand came into existence. Chalda Mahasu set up camp at a spot overlooking the temple of Hanol on the other bank at Thadiyar and ordered the construction of a temple. By 2003, the temple had been built, and despite the unease on the other bank, owing to a temple seeking to challenge Chalda Mahasu's supreme authority at the consecration, the message from the oracles of the four brother gods was one of solidarity. But perhaps the most vexing of all issues troubling the subjects of Mahasu was the date of the river crossing. Chalda Mahasu, according to convention, spends 12 years on each bank. When the 12 years in the region of Pansi were coming to an end, the Chalda procession in his region set up a scorching pace. Departing from the village of Kashdhar, Chalda began asking the hosts to establish temples at each place the procession halted. Within the period of 2 years, there were new temples at Thadiyar, Kashdhar, and Bharar. Once this task was accomplished, Chalda changed the route plan and instead of journeying to Bholad, decided to proceed to Shiraji. Chalda Mahasu's unscheduled arrival now made Shiraji the focus of the entire Mahasu realm. Here, Chalda Mahasu commissioned another magnificent edifice that took 7 long years to accomplish, extending Mahasu's stay in Pansi to 19 years, against the usual 12, with everyone wondering whether the Devta was, after all, planning to slip into sedentary retirement. Finally, the day of the consecration arrived. Mahasu consecrations are political assemblies of deities and politicians alike. As the more than 100 palanquins bearing the divine kings and lesser deities continued to arrive at Shiraji with their retinues, their bearers busied themselves setting up camps in the large field cleared for the festival. While the oracle of each devta was in a state of heightened possession, rarely seen rituals like Himalayan rope sliding were being performed. Several men who accompanied the vehicles of the divinities carried weapons such as pickaxes, machetes, and swords. They also carried with them firearms, rifles slung on their shoulders. While the entire scene appeared very far removed from present-day reality, there were several elements to the event that reminded one of its extraordinary contemporaneity. The day the consecration was done, delegations from Sati approached the Chalda Mahasu oracle, inviting their divine king to their homes on this side of the river for his 12th yearly sojourn. While some invitations are accepted, others are summarily rejected by the Chalda oracle, owing to disrespect caused to the divine king or his messengers in the past. The oracle announced that the procession would move further, leaving the just opened temple almost deserted, but unquestioningly, preparations for the arduous trek began. Even though the general direction of the Mahasu procession indicated the divine king's intentions, no one knew how much time it would actually take or whether the river would be crossed at all. Once again, Mahasu set up a fiery pace as if testing his subjects' devotion, forcing them to walk in the biting winter, over snowbound passes and through rain-drenched valleys. The distance was almost 300 kilometers. Organizing the expedition would be a logistics nightmare for Mahasu officials, for they would need porters to carry the Divine King's treasures and the drummer bards to perform the rituals of waking the deity, his invocations, and sending him into repose. After a grueling walk through the mountains, we arrived at Bhutanu, a small but idyllic village in Uttarkashi. With Hanol close by across the river, it was a foregone conclusion that river crossing was imminent. But Mahasu's priests, who come from clans settled in 4 villages that belonged to Mahasu, refused to oblige. Their contention was that all along they had been made to share offerings made to the temples with clans across the river, even though, due to their hard work in staying with the deity, the offerings should belong to them. They would not carry the Divine King further unless their demands were met. On the other hand, the deity's officials were under tremendous pressure to make the crossing happen. The district administrations of Dehradun on the other bank of the Tons and of Uttarkashi on this side of the river agreed that since law and order arrangements had been made, the crossing would have to take place soon. Mahasu subjects began to converge on both banks of the Tons, some to give their Devata a tearful farewell, others to welcome Chalda Mahasu to their region for 12 or more years. In the midst of conjecture over whether the Devata would cross or not, and terrible winter weather, the Divine King decided to do a tour of the village. Suddenly the sun peered out of the clouds and young women began to go into a possessed state. The deity, like a king in state, moved with his parasol until an entire clan blocked his path. They just sat there, goat offerings in hand. As the procession arrived, the goat was given, asking for blessings leading to an end in discord within the clan. But the Mahasu oracle wouldn't oblige, and in gestures kept asking for more. The family elders kept reiterating that they had given as much wealth as they could, but the deity kept insisting on something particular. For almost an hour, the stalemate continued, the Mahasu oracle relentless in his demand. Many objects were suggested as an offering until someone remembered that an old silver coin had indeed been lying around among the family valuables. The coin was brought, which the deity gladly accepted, inserting it in the mouth of one of the lion heads of the palanquin. When the palanquin moved forward, blowing through the seated clan members, until it reached a woman who was already possessed, bringing her under its shadow, even as she writhed in pain, the Devata moved forward, as if having cleansed her soul. The family stepped under the Divine King's parasol, gratefully seeking blessings. As the palanquin progressed, it was the turn of the Mahasu minister to approach the divine king with a request. His question was quite straightforward. He wanted to know when the deity would cross the river. For a moment, the oracle seemed to be taken aback. He hemmed and hawed and complained that perhaps the people of Bansi had tired of him, did not want to host him any longer. Finally, the minister played his trump card, taking off his cap and keeping it inverted before the deity, in a gesture of ultimate supplication. The oracle finally announced that the decision would come soon, and so saying, entered the home of a village elder. This was a clear signal that the deity would, in fact, move the next day. Had he entered the temple, it would indicate that he was preparing for the long haul. The palanquin moved the next morning, heading toward its last stop, Thadiyar, where the temple overlooking the other bank stood. Here the stalemate over the crossing continued, with the priests relentless in their demands. However, without their ritual performances, the deity would not move. Time was running out. Another day's delay would bring in Posh, the winter months when the Devata would not travel. In the dead of night, it seemed the people's worst fears of violence seemed to be coming through. A queue of torchlights was seen coming towards the Thadiyar temple. The people from across were coming to get their deity, forcibly, if need be. Heated negotiations ensued, but it was finally decided that the deity would finally cross the next day. It was an emotional send-off for the deity, but the deity's ghosts, possessed oracles of the demigods, and advanced priests would cross the bridge, consecrating the space.
आगे सीधो आगे रहो ना आप मेन हुआ अरे वहाँ रहो आप समझा करो हेलो हाँ नमस्कार जी हाँ बोलो हम ये बीच जरा मैं चाल महाराजा आए थे तो जब पार गया आप नहीं मानते आप देख रहे हैं आप कोई मालूम
Basik of Sati also joined in the ritual dancing. The four siblings united in a unique display of bonhomie. The entire Mahasu clan seemed to have come together. Finally, the Mahasu palanquin arrived at the bridge. The large welcome party was overcome with emotion. Accompanying Chalda Mahasu's palanquin was that of Babasik, perhaps entering Sati territory for the first time in living memory. All controversies forgotten for the time being, with the ritual performances creating communitas and effervescence, opportunities for uniting in the diversity of complex Himalayan village life.